Hi everyone, the book I'm reviewing today is called The Lost Love of Akbar Manzil by Shubnum. It's a local South African author. It's a fiction book, so not what I normally read, but I love supporting local talent, and I read Shubnum's memoir that I thoroughly enjoyed. This book was an absolute delight. It's a story about grief and pain and love. And all these human emotions, and I think it's something we all go through, so it's a book that we all will be able to relate to. I got mine from Bridge Books, and I know Exclusive Books also has stock of these, so do get yourself a copy. It was an absolute fantastic read. I'm going to read some extracts for you. She is going home. It is not really home, but her father says it is because he believes it. He says home can be many places, even places you haven't been before. He says home can also be a memory if you return to it enough. Sana wants to know exactly how many times you have to return to make a memory home, and her father says you will know when it happens. He raises a grizzled eyebrow. So much food, beta. Bilal looks down at the packets in his hands and grins. I find nothing feeds the soul as well as food. To see two human beings merge seamlessly into one distinct shape left her breathless. From then on, she has tried to discover how love affects the shape of things. It is there between the discarded shapes of discarded people's lives that Sana feels most comfortable. She spends her afternoons in the passage peering, prodding, and pulling open things. She shines her torch into boxes, unrolls carpets, and empties glass bottles, trying to revive the forgotten by acknowledging them. She pushes her fingers into their chests, pumps gently. She leans in and whispers, "Are you still alive?" Her mother sometimes wondered if it was her fault, he said. She wondered if she had eaten something wrong or had taken too many walks. She sometimes blamed an apricot she had eaten from an orchard. She said it had looked bad, but she had eaten it anyway. Other days, she would stop for a moment and say, "Ah, it must have been the chicken that day. I saw the way the hen looked at me. Her eyes were hard." Given to bouts of melancholy, her mother had always thought of herself as a damaged person. Often she felt that she had spread her brokenness to her children at some point. After all there had been inside her, they of all people were closest to whatever was wrong. It seems to her that she had been the coward, the one who let her sister down, as if they made some pact in the womb that if they cannot be together, they will leave together. Sometimes she feels the remains of her sister still in her blood or caught in the stitches of the scar. It's different, Sana replies. She thinks about her encounter a few minutes ago, and also the same. The landscape, the buildings, the people, and no mother always telling me what to do. It felt like I was my own person suddenly. It felt like I was real. Doctor falls suddenly silent. But didn't you miss home? Doctor leans back in his chair. No, Betty. I wanted to be Irish. Some days I almost thought I was. He chuckles, then shakes his head. Why? Why did I want to be Irish? Sana nods. He looks down. I think I was ashamed of who I was. I so badly wanted to be someone else, and in Dublin I could be anyone. I felt like I could make myself into someone new, you know. Sana, who knows all about this feeling, looks down at the biscuit she's holding. She watches crumbs fall to the carpet. And could you? She asks softly. Doctor sips his tea. I learned a new place doesn't mean you get to start over, he said, sounding a little bitter. There is a pause before he continues. Still, I stayed. After I became a doctor, I called Ireland my new home and vowed never to return to India again. My mother wrote me letters, but I stopped replying. I thought I was my own person and I thought it was enough. But the past will always follow you, no matter how hard you try to leave it behind. He puts his cup down and sighs. Betty, when you're away from your family and everything you know for so long, it eats you up. I did not understand this then. I stopped talking so much or going anywhere. I stopped sleeping. I just sat with my books and pretended to read. His wrinkled face turns creased as he frowns at the memory. Sana leans forward in her seat, feeling an urge to reach out and touch his hand in some way. It is such an unusual feeling for her that she coughs and shifts in her seat to distract herself. Doctor continues in a gravely voice, and then news of my mother's death arrives. He closes his eyes. I regret, but it's too late now. He lowers his voice. Even then, it was too late. He trails off and turns quiet. A moment passes before Sana asks tentatively, So, you never went back to India? No. He sits back. I try to live my new life in Ireland, but I don't know, somehow it always felt like a lie. Something didn't feel right about it. He looks into his hands. But you know, I preferred it that way. He nods to himself. I know it sounds terrible, but the noise was better than the quietness. It meant we were still alive. It meant there was work to be done. All I knew was I had to work as hard as I could. Everything else was forgotten. Forgive me. I haven't spoken about this in a long time. He sits back and continues. I kept moving. I didn't want to stay in one place for too long. Why not? Asked Sana. I wanted to forget who I was. I didn't even want to know my own name anymore. And some days I didn't. The longer hours I worked, the less I slept, the less I remembered. And then it was 1960, and the continent was exploding. I moved with an aid organization from Congo to Somalia, then Sierra Leone. My colleagues, my fellow doctors, they told me to slow down, to go home and rest. But where was home? Where could I rest? I didn't know. Sana nods. She knows about home. She knows it is not a simple place to find. Doctor leans forward suddenly, his eyes slightly glazed. I still remember this one day. I was sitting with a sick child in a refugee camp, and someone switched on the radio, and there was a Bembe song playing. The sudden beat in the quiet camp made one of the nurses smile, and she started to sway her hips. And one of the other nurses started laughing and joined her, and soon the whole camp was clapping and smiling with the swaying nurses as the crackle of the radio went on. I started clapping along too, and I was smiling, then laughing. And then I was crying, and I didn't even know it until I felt the tears and brought my fingers to my face. And then I was sobbing, and I thought in the commotion no one had noticed. But after a moment, I felt the arms of the child whose bed I was sitting at rise up around me, and this child with his little body was comforting me over a sorrow even I couldn't explain. He almost laughs at her brusqueness. Yes, the very next day. Do you feel it? They say when you lose a part of yourself, it can feel like it's still there, like a phantom. She looks around the room, but it's not real. It's just your imagination playing tricks. Doctor nods. Oh yes, that feeling never really goes away. Then for me, the war was over. because I couldn't run away from myself any longer. It felt like my life was over. She knew how to talk to me. That's a rare thing, you know, knowing how to talk to another person. He smiles. Have you been writing this down? He asks. Sana, embarrassed, says, sorry, I hope you don't mind. I just write things down to remember later, the parts that feel important. Doctor nods. That's clever. I wish I wrote down more things. Sana is quiet. She takes in the moment. She tries to remember what it feels like to hear this, how the morning light passes through the window onto the plants around her, how she can hear the seagulls in the distance. This is how love sounds. It was in that precise moment I knew I would marry her. When one human being recognizes another, she treads in the feeling. She asks, even though she already knows the answer, do you miss her? Every day, always, he says. Every day, always. Her unhappiness stems from two sources, the first being the more troubling one. She knows the new tenant is trouble when she discovers he abandoned the farm to move here and become a cook. She has never known a man who cooked for a living, and this makes her wary. Why were these men trying to do things they weren't supposed to? The world must be kept in balance. Girls must marry at 18 and men must have stable jobs as doctors or accountants. Everyone knows it. The way they know never to paint their fingernails with polish or shake hands with a Shia, especially in Johannesburg, where she hears they are congregating in droves. She isn't asking for much. She doesn't expect girls to marry boys from the same village in India as then. The same region would be acceptable. She just wishes people would follow the rules. She feels like the constant keeper of balance in the house. If that modern doctor and that deaf fancy had their way, they would be living with black people, or worse, white people. And now the strange new tenant who has barely been there a month offers to cook for them. It's very suspicious. Maybe he's an undercover Shia trying to convert them all. You never know, you just never know. Or maybe he's just one of those modernists who thinks women and men can do the same things. That poor child, no wonder she wanders around in those dreadful clothes. Razia chastises Fancy as she shifts in her seat. Don't start, please. Who's starting? Who's starting? It's just the truth. If you get a good man, you hold on to him. You won't have your good looks forever. In this life, you have to be realistic. When my family brought a proposal, we checked if the boy had a decent job and I got married. Khalas. At least I had a husband, huh? At least I know what it's like to have a child. And tell me, Razia Bibi, how did that turn out for you? Says a deep voice. Everyone turns. A slender woman stands leading in the entrance of a cloud of smoke. She is draped in an elaborate silk shawl, wearing an array of mismatched bangles that tinkle slightly as she steps forward out of the shadows. Where's that husband now? The woman says as she raises a hand to her lips to suck elegantly on a cigarette between her fingers. Where's that son? She asks throatily before sweeping into the dining room. She passes close to Razia Bibi and pauses. Wonder what happened to him. She continues to an empty chair and seats herself opposite the older woman, who glowers and gently blows a stream of smoke in her direction. Seems to me you're just as alone, she says, and she leans back in her seat. Such a shame. The table goes quiet. Sana has seen many shapes that people can take, broken and whole, full and empty, but she has never seen anything quite like this. The woman who seats herself before them seems to have a shattered quality to her. It's as if she is glass. You look hard enough and 1,000 reflections look back. Somewhere in the house, someone is wailing. It's not me, her sister, sitting in the dark next to her, says. Sometimes Sana wondered if she had made her mother sick, if her years of resentment had grown into a ball that entered her mother's mouth and travelled inside her to rot away. "Ah," says Doctor, looking into his teacup, "my mother too was a difficult woman. She was complicated, selfish, and proud. We didn't have the best relationship. In her last letter, she begged me to visit. She asked me to come so we could put the past right. Even she had not guessed she would die so soon after sending that letter." He looks down at his hands. "Maybe I should have gone to see her. They are both quiet." The house watches this with a morbid fascination. No one who has lived at Akbar Manzil has remained eager for knowledge of the past for long. The desire for discovery is something the house snuffs out early by making things feel impenetrable, deepening shadows, hiding doors, accumulating objects, and cloaking itself with a sense of despair and gloom. It is not a difficult thing to do when so many who arrive at its doors are already so forgotten, their existence so battered that it is merely like blowing out a candle that is already sputtering. But the girl has something the others do not, a questionable amount of soul. And a questionable amount of soul is a dangerous thing. It makes people unpredictable. It can send them out in the darkness to seek things that others would never dare. It can keep a flame burning long after it was supposed to go out. Sana picks up the frame and wipes the dust off the glass with her sleeve. The man is smiling as he turns to look at the woman, a playful expression in his face, and Sana recognizes it immediately, two shapes that have fallen into one. Meanwhile, Akbar seems to grow more and more enchanted with the continent. There is something about East Africa, he says. The land is not ashamed to be itself. The green is more vivid. Does she not see it too, he asks? The shadows are deeper. The lights burn more brightly, and the sea is in everything. The air, the walls, the way people speak. He sets foot on the land and feels the ground shudder beneath his boot, and he knows it is a sign. He knows his travels are over. He simply says, "This is where we will start our new life." He begins to unpack and tells his wife to settle down. They are home. Surely love was not a thing that always left. She thinks of the old couple that lived next door on the farm. The old woman, Tant Alcy, was suffering from dementia, and her husband, Wampit, always held her hand, even as he laid the table in the evenings and made soup for her. When Sana visited, he would tell stories about Tant Alcy's childhood as if they were his, talk about her father and her mother and the way she ran around her kitchen barefoot as a child, racing after her sisters until her mother took a broom and knocked her feet. The fact that he could make her memories his own made Sana believe that love was not a thing that always left. Love to her was the thing that stayed. She picks him up and begins the takbir, preparing him for a life she has already mapped out, a life in which everyone must follow the path they have been given. It is difficult to pinpoint the exact moment when fate veers off the designated path. Some blame a specific person, a certain action, or the consequence of a particular sin. And it does not know why. Perhaps because it is so very tired, or because it knows what it is like to want something that may never come. It decides to answer the girl's question. The jinn closes its eyes. She slept for 1 week, and when she awoke, she gave up her music and left. There was so little music left in her by then anyway. She traveled to the east and to the west, and she learned to choose her destinations by simply pointing a finger on a map and making her way there as best she could. She ended up in so many strange places with many strange people. She met people like her, people running, people searching for something. These people always find one another, drawn by some invisible thread. I hope you enjoyed the extracts. I really do suggest you grab this book. It's a quick read, great for the weekend, and you'll be supporting a local author. If you have read it, let me know what you think, and also what you're currently reading.